I want to talk about today is democracy. Okay, and the prefix to democracy is demo. Demo means people. So this is a government of the people. In a democracy, citizens hold political power. Okay, either directly or through elected representatives. When it's through elected representatives, that's what we call a republic. And a republic is a type of democracy, and it's the type of democracy we have here in America. Say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you'll hit that word republic. Okay, directly means if we were to vote on every single law, every single issue that came up, then that would be called a direct democracy, and it's just not efficient given the number of people in America. Okay, under a democracy, the majority, meaning 51%, is the prevailing source of power. So if 51% want something to happen, theoretically, under a democracy, it should eventually happen. The next type of government I would like to talk about is called a dictatorship. Alright, a lot of us are very familiar with what a dictatorship is. This here is a dictator, and he runs a dictatorship. Okay, a dictator means somebody who has all the power. All power. Okay, and this is Bashar al-Assad. He's the president. He calls himself the president, but he is a dictator of Syria, meaning he has all the power. So a dictatorship, and this is where we start seeing a lot of words that mean pretty much the same thing. It's a form of authoritarian government under which power is concentrated in the hands of a small group or even one individual. So a dictatorship could mean a small group, could mean one individual, but power is concentrated. Okay, so power is concentrated. It's nothing like a democracy where the people have the power. In a dictatorship, one person has the power. Okay, sometimes this will even be called totalitarian. So you see, we have a lot of words that mean similar, that have similar meanings. We have dictatorship right here, we have authoritarian right here, and we have totalitarian right there. And totalitarian is a government in which the government tries to control all aspects. So they try to control all aspects of your life. So I guess the need for two separate words is because you could have a dictatorship that's very nice and they don't try to control your life and they kind of let you do what you want. But usually when you have a dictator, they are totalitarian. They do try to control all aspects of your life. They try to control all aspects of the country. So the economy, the politics, and the lives of its citizens. So that's what a dictatorship is. The next type of government I'd like to talk about is, it's called a monarchy. And under a monarchy, power to rule is inherited by birthright. Alright, so you're not elected. You're not elected. It's a birthright. And there aren't very many monarchies throughout the world anymore. Used to be a little more popular. But King Mswati III of Swaziland is a current example of a monarchy. One reason monarchies might not be good is because, say, King Mswati, say he's great. Alright, but who's going to be the next leader? King Mswati's son. What if he is not so great? Okay, what if the son is bad? So all of a sudden your government is bad, right? It could be corrupt. Monarchies can turn sour really quickly. So that's a monarchy. The next type of government I'd like to talk about is what's called a theocracy. Theocracy starts with the prefix theo, theo meaning God. Okay, so a theocracy is a government ruled by or subject to a religious authority. So Iran is our best modern example, and their supreme leader is called the Ayatollah. So this is an Islamic state or an Islamic country. They are very much ruled by their belief in Islam, and it's vital and very important to their government. So theocracies are very interesting, and that is just theocracies in a nutshell. Well, I want to talk about economic systems. We're going to talk about three types of economic systems today: capitalism, socialism, and communism. All right, next I want to talk about capitalism. Capitalism is what we all experience here every day in America. And here you can see this kind of looks like the Coca-Cola sign, but it says capitalism. So Coca-Cola is a great example of capitalism because it's one of the biggest companies in the world. Capitalism is also known as free enterprise, sometimes also known as a market economy. And it's an economic system in which all or most of the means of production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit. Alright, so profit is our key word, and privately owned. These are important aspects of capitalism and free enterprise. Again, private property is essential to the idea of capitalism. So individuals, people, can buy, sell, and own property. Okay, and they can pass it on. Okay, the idea of ownership is essential to capitalism. You have the right to keep your profits. Also, freedom of competition. Competition is vital in capitalism, and capitalism encourages competition. Okay, and then freedom of choice. People can choose where they live, work, and what they do. Okay, so freedom and capitalism often are associated with one another. So who decides what is produced? Well, we do, the people, the market. The market means the people. Alright, so if people are buying iPhones like crazy, they're going to make tons of iPhones, right? If people want Big Macs, McDonald's is going to make a lot of Big Macs. So the market, the people, are deciding what is going to be produced. Not the government, but the people. Next economic system we're going to talk about is socialism. And it says socialism, the radical idea of sharing. So let's figure out what that means. Alright, socialism is an economic system based on the premise that basic industries should be owned or controlled by the government. Owned or controlled by the government. So you see now, this is different than capitalism, so that resources may be more evenly distributed. So in socialism, they believe in distributing the wealth. Aspects of socialism. We have private ownership, just like we do in capitalism, but we also have public ownership. And the public ownership, or the government ownership, okay, the government ownership is of vital industries or important industries, like maybe say healthcare. Okay, in socialism, some choices are limited, but the intent is to create social equality. We want everybody to be equal. Okay, some negative aspects of socialism, according to some people, is that it reduces individual incentive. If you're going to redistribute the wealth and everybody's going to get an equal share, what incentive do I have to work hard? Why should I work hard? So that creates what we call a brain drain. People aren't living up to their full potential. Communism. In theory, communism works. Communism is an economic and political system in which the government makes almost all economic decisions, really all economic decisions, and they own all the factors of production. Okay, and the factors of production are like natural resources, factories. There is no business, there is no private property. Okay, the government makes all decisions. They decide what's going to be made, how much is going to be made, and who's going to make it. Okay, so communism is all about what's good for the whole, not for the individual. So some more aspects of communism. Once again, the government owns all factors of production, and the government is in charge of central planning. They control the economy. Communism is also known as a command economy. Okay, so that's important. Okay, under communism, ideally everyone would be equal and share the wealth. That would require, of course, for the government to have no corruption and for everything to work perfectly. What I'm trying to illustrate here is the idea of the economic spectrum. The idea that no one country has truly achieved 100% capitalism, and no country has achieved 100% communism either. They're somewhere in the middle usually. It's usually somewhere in between, somewhere on this spectrum. So let's say just a few countries that we might know a little something about. The United States is very much the United States very much fits under the system of capitalism, but they also have some aspects of socialism. So you might fit them right here, right? They might be somewhere between capitalism and socialism. Whereas a country like Cuba or North Korea is going to be much further towards communism. But countries could fit anywhere in here, right? They could fit more towards capitalism, have no restriction, no government ownership, or they could have a little more government ownership than the United States and a little less than North Korea. So this is a spectrum. You could be anywhere on this line. So let's characterize the most important aspects of culture really quickly. The biggest aspects, I should say. Okay, religion. Religion defines culture. What is your religion? Language, of course, defines culture. Alright, and let's just throw one more in there. Traditions / customs define culture. So what kind of traditions do you have? All this other stuff, though, this is part of culture, like football and slang. Okay, this is all part of culture, so culture is very hard to define. In the lesson on culture, you're going to need to know 3 words, 3 vocabulary words. The first is cultural diffusion. Alright, the second is cultural divergence. And the third is cultural convergence. Okay, so hopefully you have kind of a clue on what cultural divergence and what cultural convergence are, just based on our previous lesson on tectonic plates. We know cultural divergence means something is dividing them, the cultures are moving away from each other, and cultural convergence means the cultures are coming together in some way. And we just know that from our vocabulary in prior lessons. Diffusion is what I want to talk about first. So let's go ahead and talk about cultural diffusion. So to talk about cultural diffusion, I want to talk about the Silk Road. So we might not know much about the Silk Road. It's actually something we'll learn about in world history in your 10th grade year. If you do know about it, that's great. So basically what the Silk Road was a term to describe ancient trade routes, okay, between the East and the West. Alright, it got its name from the lucrative Chinese silk trade. So the road wasn't actually made of silk, but they traded silk on it, right? Westerners got Chinese silk. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at the definition of cultural diffusion. We know what culture means. Let's talk about diffusion. When something diffuses, that means it's spreading, to spread. So when you spray a cologne or a perfume in a room, you're going to smell it right next to you, but that cologne or perfume, that scent, is going to diffuse throughout the rest of the room. So by the time it gets to the end of the room, it might be, not as strong, but it is going to diffuse throughout the room. So, cultural diffusion means ideas or traits of one culture being borrowed by another culture. Okay, so cultural diffusion is simply the spreading of culture. That's all it means. So the Silk Road that we were talking about promoted cultural diffusion, right? Chinese silk went west. Alright, and that's not all that went west, right? Chinese religion, ideas, that all went back and forth all along the Silk Road. This is an example of cultural diffusion. This is a McDonald's and it's in Saudi Arabia. So this is an aspect of Western culture, the whole idea of fast food going east to Saudi Arabia. Okay, here's another example of diffusion. This is a Korean rapper. Okay, rap started in the United States, but it moved to Korea. So this guy probably heard American rappers and he said, hey, I can do that in my language. So that's an example of cultural diffusion. Alright, sushi. It's another example of cultural diffusion. Sushi originated in Japan. Now you can find it in the West, in America. This is an example of cultural diffusion. Look at this. This is a commercial of Beyonce, okay, in Japan. The next term we're going to talk about is cultural convergence. Convergence. Last time you heard that word convergence, we were talking about tectonic plates, and the tectonic plates were coming together and they were colliding. This time, cultures are coming together and colliding. Okay, when they do that, they create new cultural patterns. Okay, so all this means this happens through diffusion. So cultural diffusion is part of cultural convergence. When the diffusion happens, sometimes the cultures come together and they blend and they create this new culture. They take aspects of each culture and they add them together. An example of this is the Columbian Exchange. America as a melting pot is another example of this. Cultural convergence is quite common. The next word I want to talk about is cultural divergence. The last time we heard the word divergence, once again we were talking about tectonic plates. This time the plates were moving apart or separating. They were separate. So it's the same thing, except this time we're dealing with culture. So culture remaining separate or separating. Pretty easy, right? Okay, so the definition is when two groups, okay, they develop completely independent or separate cultures, or when two groups, despite being close to each other, when two groups' cultures remain separate. Two examples of this happening is in Canada, where in Quebec we have French Canada and English Canada, despite the two areas being right by each other and it being one country. And we have an example in India, where there are groups of Hindus and there are groups of Muslims within the country. Those are both examples of cultural divergence.